to do to Sodom and Gomorrah. And when he tells Abraham about this, Abraham stands before God and he petitions God on behalf of the city for the sake of Lot. And but I also think that he just looked at the city as well. And he also, none of us desire to see people destroyed. None of us want to see God's wrath fall upon anyone. And here's the reason why. Because I deserve God's wrath just as much as anybody else in this world. And so I don't want God's wrath to be on anybody because I know I deserve it as well. And so I believe that Abraham also had Sodom and Gomorrah in mind, but I think his main intention was Lot. And so he gets it all the way down. He asks the question, shall the judge of all the earth do right? And shall you judge the righteous with the wicked? And he asks him if he would spare the city for 50 and then for 40 and he gets it all the way down to 10. And he thinks he's done because that's pretty much how many people Lot had in his family. And so he kind of assumed that, okay, the city's safe. But the city was not safe. And so chapter number 19 is these angels now going to the city of Sodom and Gomorrah and calling Lot to come out. And so just as a reminder, we're going to read this chapter. I know it's a little bit more lengthy, but I think it's important that we read through it and kind of remind ourselves. It's been 2 weeks now since we've gone over this. And so starting in verse number 1, it says, "And there came 2 angels to Sodom at even. And Lot sat in the gate of Sodom, and Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them. And he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. And he said, Behold now, my lords, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house, and tarry all night, and wash your feet, and ye shall rise up early, and go on your ways. And they said, Nay, but we will abide in the street all night. And he pressed upon them greatly, and they turned in unto him, and entered into his house, and he made them a feast, and did bake unleavened bread, and they did eat." And we kind of talked about how Lot kind of treats these angels, these visitors, in the same way that Abraham treats them when he sees them. Abraham shows them an unusual amount of reverence and hospitality, and so does Lot. And so, maybe there was an indication in some way that maybe he recognized them as being angels. I don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us that but he clearly kind of treats them, I think, a little differently than he would typically, because he bows down to them. He invites them into his house and serves them food and things like that, which wasn't all that unusual, but I think it's a little bit more hospitality than typical. My personal opinion from reading the text, but I could be wrong. But verse number 4 says, "But before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round about, both old and young, all the people from every quarter. And they called unto Lot and said unto him, Where are the men which came into thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them. And Lot went out at the door unto them, and shut the door after them." So you see here the wickedness of Sodom being shown to us. And when God says to Abraham that he's going to destroy the city, he says it's because the wickedness of the city, there's people who have cried out to him because of the wickedness of the city. And when sin abounds, so does sorrow. When sin abounds, so does pain, and so does harm to others. And so that's very clear from this passage that we're reading here. And look what Lot's solution to this is. He says, and said, I pray you, brethren, do not so wickedly. Behold, now I have 2 daughters, which have not known man. Let me, I pray you, bring them out unto you. And do you to them as is good in your eyes. Only unto these men do nothing, for therefore came they under the shadow of my roof. And they said, Stand back. And they said again, This one fellow came in to sojourn, and he will needs be a judge. Now will we deal worse with thee than with them. So they turn on Lot. And Lot, who is a sojourner, he's an outsider. He's now a judge in the city. He's somebody who is he's sitting in the gate, which was a sign of authority in those days. He goes from looking at Sodom and Gomorrah, then to living in Sodom and Gomorrah, and now leading in Sodom and Gomorrah. And they look at him and said, Hey, you're a stranger. Now you want to be a judge, and now you're telling us to do this. We're going to treat you worse than we're going to treat them. And then it says, And they pressed sore upon the man, even Lot, and came near to break the door. But the men put their hand and pulled Lot into the house to them and shut to the door. And they smote the men that were at the door of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves to find the door. And the men said unto Lot, Hast thou here any besides, son-in-law, and thy sons, and thy daughters, and whatsoever thou hast in the city? Bring them out of this place. For we will destroy this place, because the cry of them is waxen great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. And Lot went out and spake unto his sons-in-law, which married his daughters, and said, Up, get you out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city. But he seemed as one that mocked unto his sons-in-law. And we talked a lot about that, about how the lost look at our lives. And here you have the sons-in-laws of Lot. When he comes to them and tells them about the coming judgment, they don't believe him. And how can you and I, if we're going to live in sin just like the world around us, confront them with the coming judgment? How can you and I, if we're living just like the world, present to them the gospel in the way that we need to? And Lot here, what a sad story we have, because he's going to have to eventually, we're going to talk about it here in a second, but he's going to watch his daughters die, and the brimstone coming down onto their homes and their houses, and they're going to be destroyed. All because of the lack of testimony that he has, that when he speaks of God's coming judgment, they don't believe him. They think he's joking. They think he's kidding around. Verse number 15. It says, And when the morning arose, then the angels hastened Lot, saying, Arise, take thy wife and thy 2 daughters, which are here, lest thou be consumed in the iniquity of the city. And while he lingered, the men laid hold upon his hand, and upon the hand of his wife, and upon the hand of his two daughters, the Lord being merciful unto him. And they brought him forth and set him without the city. And it came to pass, when they had brought them forth abroad, that he said, Escape for thy life. Look not behind thee, neither stay thou in all the plain. Escape to the mountain, lest thou be consumed. And I want you to notice in verse number 16, the Lord being merciful unto him. Aren't you glad that God is merciful to us, even when we make poor choices? Because Lot's for sure made his fair share of poor choices. And then verse number 18 says, And Lot said unto them, O not so, my Lord, behold now, thy servant hath found grace in thy sight. Thou hast magnified thy mercy, which thou hast showed unto me in saving my life, and I cannot escape to the mountain, lest some evil take me and I die. Behold now, this city is near to flee unto, and it is a little one. O let me escape thither. Is it not a little one? And my soul shall live. And he said unto him, See, I have accepted thee concerning this thing also, that I will not overthrow this city, for the which thou hast spoken. Haste thee, escape thither, for I cannot do anything till thou be come thither. Therefore, the name of the city was called Zoar. The sun was risen upon the earth when Lot entered into Zoar. Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities and that which grew upon the ground. But his wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham got up early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord, and he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the plain, and beheld, and lo, the smoke of the country went up as the smoke of a furnace. And it came to pass, when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham, and sent Lot out of the midst of the overflow, when he overthrew the cities in the which Lot dwelt. And Lot went up out of Zoar, and dwelt in the mountain, and his 2 daughters with him. For he feared to dwell in Zoar, and he dwelt in a cave, he and his 2 daughters. And the firstborn said unto the younger, Our father is old, and there is not a man in the earth to come in unto us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve seed of our father. And they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father, and he perceived not when she lay down, nor when she arose. And it came to pass on the morrow, that the firstborn said unto the younger, Behold, I lay yesternight with my father, let us make him drink wine this night also, and go thou in and lie with him, that we may preserve seed of our father. And they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger arose and lay with him, and he perceived not when she lay down, nor when she arose. Thus were both the daughters of Lot with child by their father. And the firstborn bare a son, and called his name Moab, the same as the father of the Moabites unto this day. And the younger, she also bare a son, and called his name Ben-Ammi. The same is the father of the children of Ammon unto this day. And so we see here, really one of the more sad stories in Scripture is given to us in Genesis chapter number 19. And in fact, this several parts of Genesis chapter number 19, I kind of would like to just skip over, you know. They're uncomfortable to read about. They're uncomfortable talking about because of the wickedness of mankind being displayed in such a fashion. But we looked at last week, we saw First of all, we saw his progression, Lot's progression, going from just looking towards or Sodom and Gomorrah, to living in it, to leading in it. And then we looked at his regression, how he's not just affected by the sin, but he's also accepting of it. He offers his own daughters up to these men instead of confronting them and standing in before them and saying, don't do such wickedness. And then we see the consternation of him, that he has such a sorrowful time. And we kind of finished up that last week. And we see him not only in verse 17 to 23, we not only see him lose his married daughters, but he loses his wealth as well. He leaves everything behind there in Sodom and Gomorrah. The very reason that he moved there was the financial benefits of those well-watered plains. And now he doesn't have that. He also doesn't have his daughters. He also doesn't have his sons. He's leaving all of those things behind. And the things that he thought he was going to gain, he actually lost. And it reminds us of that great verse of what shall a man give in exchange for a soul? Can a man gain the whole world and lose his own soul? And we are so often can find ourselves becoming earthly creatures and thinking like this world is our home, but it's not our home. No, we're not to live for the things of this world. The Bible tells us in John not to love the things of this world. That we are to live for eternity and not for today. And so his earthly decisions cost him greatly. And he lost those things on this earth that he thought he was going to gain. And now he's looking at the option in verse number 18 and 19. The angels are telling him to go into the mountains. And he's fleeing for his life. And even in fleeing for his life, he doesn't want to listen. And he says, no, I can't go to the mountains unless some evil take me there. Something bad can happen to me up in those mountains. Why don't I go over to this little place, this little city? And he goes over to what is called Zoar in chapter number 23, I think it is. And that word Zoar means small place or insignificant. It was the smallest. There was 5 cities in the plain, and Zoar was the smallest of them. And so he goes there, and God's plan was to destroy all the cities of the plain. But because Lot goes to Zoar, he spares that city. And we see that in verse number 21. It says, and he said unto them, see, I have accepted thee concerning this thing also, that I will not overthrow this city for the which thou hast spoken. God was going to wipe out all those cities of the plain. But he spares Zoar because Lot goes there. And Zoar was kind of stuck right in the middle of the plain. So Sodom and Gomorrah were to Zoar's north, I believe, and the other 2 cities were to the south, and Zoar was stuck there in the middle, and that's where Lot chose to flee to instead of listening to these angels. And the fact that Lot is still unwilling to seek spiritual safety rather than physical shows his lack of maturity as a believer even then. He's worried about his physical safety up in the mountains. And so he continues staying in a place that, although Zoar is a small city, it clearly was a city that was wicked like Sodom, else God wouldn't have planned to destroy it. And so he's still not thinking of the spiritual repercussions of his decisions. Have you ever met somebody who repeats the same mistakes? Have you ever met somebody who you watch them in their life, they kind of just, they never learn from the things that they're supposed to learn from? I've met one of those people. His name's Peter Touchstone. I do that kind of stuff all the time. I'm always making those same mistakes. And so even when we look at Lot, I hope, I never get to his level of wickedness, but man, I can see myself making the same decisions, looking at this world and making decisions based on what's good for my pocketbook or what's good for me financially, or what's good for me physically, and not thinking of the spiritual things of this world. That this world's not my home. And I can plan for things and not think of, and not put God in those plans, I should say. And I'm sure you might be guilty of the same things at times as well. And we've got to often check ourselves and check our motives, check the reasons why we do things so that we don't fall prey to what Lot does. And always make those same poor choices of putting the things of this world above the things of God. When we have something like a 5-day missions conference like what we just had, and people hear, maybe they hear, maybe you have an accountant or somebody like that you share or get advice from about financial matters. And they look at, okay, you're already given, a tithe to this church. Now you're given a certain thing on top of missions, and maybe you're doing other things for different stuff, and it just doesn't make any sense. Why are you doing all this stuff? Well, because you're not thinking of the things of this world. You're thinking of eternity. And we talked I think it was on Sunday night, we talked about the privilege that we have to lay up treasures in heaven. The Bible tells us in Matthew chapter number 6 that we can lay up treasures in heaven and not have to just store up things here on this earth where moth and rust doth corrupt and where thieves break through and steal. That one day you are going to leave, and so am I. I'm going to leave everything that I own here on this world behind. It's all going to be given away, taxed away, burn away, whatever the case may be. It's all going to go somewhere else. But the things that you and I get to do for the Lord will always last. And when we look at Lot's life, we see the ultimate Christian who has no heavenly mind. He's not thinking of the heavenly things. He's only thinking of earthly things. And we see how that affects him in ways that he never would have imagined. And so verse number 22 is a very important verse. It says, "Haste thee, escape thither, for I cannot do anything till thou be come thither. Therefore the name of the place was called Zoar." That this angel cannot do what he's supposed to do until Lot is brought out. And we talked about how that connects with the rapture. I think that's kind of where we finished off last week or 2 weeks ago. Although I don't think we talked about, because I was trying to hurry up there, we didn't talk about some of this stuff earlier. But we went to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and saw that this is really a picture of the rapture. How God has not appointed us unto wrath, that he will bring us out before he judges the wicked. That's what the tribulation period is. That is God pouring out his wrath on this world. And before he does so, he's going to bring out the righteous. He's going to bring out his church, okay? And so, and Lot, you wouldn't know from Genesis 19, but he was righteous, right? Was he righteous by his actions? No, not even close. He was righteous by believing and trusting in Jesus Christ. And so are you and I righteous. And so it's a picture of us being taken out of the world before God puts his wrath or pours out his wrath upon it. And then we see the conclusion here of Lot. And you have here one of the most disturbing and tragic stories in all the Bible from 26 on down. What a sad state that Lot's family is in. And we see in this first couple verses, in verse number 23, we see that right when the sun was risen is when God begins to destroy this city. And many people believe that it's likely about the time where people would have been awake to see God's judgment, but also where people hadn't yet gone out of the city to go out into the fields and work, and people hadn't yet come into the city to trade. And so it would have been the inhabitants only likely of Sodom and Gomorrah that would have been in the cities to be destroyed, and would have been someone from outside, is what many people think is why it's so important that it's given to us, that little fact that it was right when the sun was risen. But the word overthrow that we see here in this passage is the word, is the Greek word, because we see it also in 2 Peter chapter number 2, is the Greek word catastrophe. And in verb form, it was also used to describe what Jesus does in the money changers in the temple. He overturned the tables. And that's the same word that's used in 2 Peter to describe what happens to Sodom and Gomorrah. In fact, turn in your Bibles over to 2 Peter. Throw something there in Genesis 19, because we're going to come right back. But look at 2 Peter chapter number 2. And 2 Peter chapter number 2 helps us kind of understand better why God does this. So look at verse number 4 of 2 Peter 2. It says, "For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into the chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, and spare not the old world, but saved Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly, and turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them with an overthrow," the word catastrophe, "making them an ensample unto those that after should live ungodly." So God here gives us Sodom and Gomorrah as an example of what an ungodly life leads to. But then look at what verse number 8 says. Verse 7. It says, "And deliver just Lot, vexed with filthy conversation of the wicked. For that righteous man dwelling among them and seeing and hearing vexed his righteous soul from day to day with their unlawful deeds." And then look at verse number 9. Because verse number 9 shows us, I think, something special about God that we should know and notice from this story here. It says, "The Lord knoweth how to deliver the godly out of temptations, and to reserve the unjust unto the day of judgment to be punished." That God knows how to deliver you. And that word temptations is the word, I don't know that I have the Greek word in here, but I have the Greek meaning, what the definition is in Greek. It means adversity. God knows how to deliver you out of adversity, the trials of life. And one day He will. Praise God, we're going to be delivered from all this mess down here on earth. And what a wonderful thing that is. And then we see, so turn back to Genesis chapter number 19. I told you I wouldn't keep you late, and so I need to keep my promise, so we got to move on, because I could talk more in 2 Peter. But we see Lot's wife looking back. We see that in verse number 26, but his wife looked back from behind him. And look at the instructions she's already been given. Look at verse number 15. It says, "And when the morning arose, and the angels hastened Lot," they're hurrying him, "Arise, take thy wife, thy 2 daughters." And then it says in verse number 16, "While he lingered, the men laid hold upon his hand, and upon the hand of his wife, upon the hand of his 2 daughters." So these angels are hurrying them up. And when they start to slow down, they're grabbing them and dragging them out of there. And then look at verse number 17. What they'd say to him. Look there in the middle. It says, "Escape for thy life. Look not behind thee. Neither stay thou in the plain." Get out of here. And then we see in verse number 22, look at what they say there. "Haste thee, escape thither." They're trying to hurry them. They're trying to rush them. And here, Lot's wife looks back, and she's already behind Lot. Look, it says, but his wife looked back from behind him. She was already lagging behind, and then she looks back. And the word used for looked back is to gaze, to scan. She's not just like, "Oh, hey, what's going on?" She's looking at it and waiting and longing, likely, for the things that she's lost. And she had lost things greatly. And can I tell you, sometimes we're rough on Lot's wife. We think, "Oh, man, she just wanted all those things that they left back in Sodom and Gomorrah." Yeah, you mean like her children? That was not an easy thing for Lot's wife to turn back on the things of Sodom and Gomorrah. She left at least 4 kids there. So before we get too rough on her, maybe we recognize what she truly was leaving behind, but yet she didn't. We see here, first of all, the lack of leadership of Lot, but once again, but also that she's not listening to what God has called her to do. And because of that, she is likely caught up in the destruction that happens. And we even see, and don't turn there, but I'm going to, but Luke chapter number 17 talks more about Lot's wife. And it says in verse number 32, it says, "Remember Lot's wife. Whosoever shall seek to save his life shall lose it, and whosoever shall lose his life shall preserve it." So when we think of Lot's wife, we should think of someone who's striving in this world to save their life. And what are they going to do? They're going to lose it. But if we lose our life for the Lord, if we give our life to God, we'll gain it. And that's what we're supposed to remember out of Lot's wife's life. And that pillar of salt that she became, whether that was from volcanic ash, some people surmise that maybe Sodom and Gomorrah was overthrown through volcanic eruption. It is along a fault line. But maybe recognize that no matter how it was done, God did it supernaturally, okay? It was something that God planned ahead of time. It wasn't just, He may have used natural forces to do it, but it's definitely something that was supernatural in its timing and how precise it was in its destruction. And when she looked back, she was likely caught up in all of the destruction that goes on there. And we need to remember from her life the cost that we might have in trying to keep our life so safe and secure here today. And Abraham sees the destruction of the city. Look at verse number 26. It says, Abraham got up early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord. And he looked towards Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the plain, and beheld, and lo, the smoke of the country went up as the smoke of a furnace. You see here a contrast, and we could spend a lot of time on this. In fact, I would like to, but we're not going to. But we could go to Psalm chapter number 1, and you could see the difference between the blessed man and the wicked man. And the difference of their ends, the difference of how their lives are. And here Lot he's running for his life. And Abraham, who's standing where he always stands before the Lord. In other words, he's there in his prayer closet. And he's in safety. And the contrast there of a life that decides to follow God versus a life that decides to follow the mammon, the money of this world. And then look at verse number 30. Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountains. So he finally does what the angels told him to do. Why does he do it? For he feared to dwell in Zoar. The Bible doesn't tell us why he feared. Maybe he feared because the people saw him as the reason why God destroys Sodom and Gomorrah. Maybe he fears because he saw what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah and the wickedness there, and he thought, well, Zoar's kind of similar to these cities. Maybe it's going to get overthrown one day. I need to get out of here. The Bible doesn't tell us why he's fearful, but he's fearful. And so he goes up into the mountain and lives in some caves. And we see then the sad continuation of sin. But before we look at that, look at verse number 29. It says, and it came to pass when God destroyed the cities of the plain that God remembered who? Abraham. Why does God remember Abraham? He remembers Abraham standing before him and pleading for the safety of Lot. We see here another time where God, in essence, hears our prayers. What an amazing God that when Abraham, as we learned in chapter number 18, as he stood before the Lord, God remembers him. God remembers your prayers as well. You might have some family members who have strayed from the Lord, or maybe family members who aren't saved at all. May you remember that God remembers your prayers as well. May we not be discouraged in our just because we see things happening. Abraham doesn't know that Lot was taken out of the city. All he does is he sees the destruction. And yet, God answers his prayer. And you may never see the results of answered prayers that you've had because you persisted in praying for things. And say, hey, I'm just going to keep praying for that person. I'm going to keep praying for them. And you may never see the difference that it makes in their life. But may remember that God remembers us. But then, like I said, you see from verse 30 on the sad continuation of sin. And you can take your kids out of Sodom, but you cannot take Sodom out of your kids. And here these daughters have escaped from the city, but the influence of the city is still clearly on them. They're living just like those people that were destroyed. And we must be careful the environment and the influence we allow our children to live in. Got to be careful. We got to be careful what they listen to, what they watch. And, I know as grandparents, many of you don't have as much influence as the parents do, but also strive to make sure that your children, your grandchildren are raised in an environment where they are not around the wickedness of this world and not influenced by the wickedness of the world. And then we get to verse number 32. Look, it says, come, let us make our father drink wine. They've lost everything. And yet they have enough to have wine. I think that's an interesting thing. That even in poverty, what do you often find? Vice. Still. Around here, we see many people who are in need. You can't drive over to Valley View Mall without passing several people on the side of the road who are in need. And I've passed by several of those people and seen on their sign, I need money for beer. And I'm sure you've seen that same thing on the sign. That even in their poverty, what do they desire? They desire the vices of this world. And you see here that happening in this story as well. I think that's interesting, that in their poverty they still have this vice. And these children that come as a result of this incestuous relationship bring much sorrow to Israel. The Moabites and the Ammonites are both often very hostile to the Israeli people, to the Jewish nation. But, well, before we get there, let's, you know how I like to tell us the definition of names. So Moab means from the father. That's what it means, or seed of the father. Benjamin means son of my people, or son of my kindred, or in other words, the product of incest. And can you imagine that we don't think of people's names to go with the definitions of their names, but Moab, they continue, of seed of the father, they continue that name all through the history of that nation. But God can redeem even people out of such a terrible circumstance. How do I know that? Because Ruth was a Moabitess. Ruth is one of the most godly ladies we ever find in Scripture. And yet she came from this line. And what is she? She's a part of the line of Christ. And not just the Moabites. Solomon married an Ammonite woman that became the mother of Rehoboam, who is also in the lineage of Christ. God can do amazing things in bad situations. And we look at this terrible, horrible thing, and God makes some good out of it. Although much bad happens and much sorrow is experienced through this. And when you look at Lot's life, you can't help but wonder, how did he get there? And he didn't just wake up one morning finding himself judging in the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. It was a progression. It was a slow thing. It wasn't just a one-time decision. It was small decisions over and over again that were following after the things of this world and not after the things of the Lord. And we can turn to Psalm 1 and see the difference between somebody who delights in the law of the Lord and somebody who doesn't. We could look in Proverbs 14 that says, "There is a way which seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death." You know, that verse is so important. The Bible gives us that verse twice. It gives us in Proverbs 16:25 as well. 2 Peter 2:12 tells us, "But these as natural brute beasts made to be taken and destroyed speak evil of the things that they understood not, and shall utterly perish in their own corruption." And Lot gets to this place the same way that you and I get anywhere. We get there one step at a time. We get there one step at a time. And if we continue to make decisions based on the things of this world, we might find ourselves, hopefully not in quite as bad of a situation, but a poor situation as well. And it's not going to be just one day we find ourselves in sin. It's going to be a slow, one step at a time type of a thing. And just like anything else in life, you're not going to find yourself close to the Lord unless you're following Him. You know, I can't get to Louisville, Kentucky, my hometown today, by going east. I'm not going to get there. It's just not going to happen, right? If I hop in my car and start going east, I'm never going to make it to Louisville. And the same way goes for us finding or following God. If we don't make the decision today to start toward Him and draw nigh to Him, then we're never going to draw nigh to Him. And we're going to find ourselves further and further away from Him. And you're going to look back over your life and wonder, well, how do I get here? You got there a step at a time. And James chapter 1, verse number 15 tells us the path that sin leads us. It says, "Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin, and sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death." And that's the story of Lot's life. Lot first just looked at the cities. He just looked at those well-watered plains. He thought, man, I can get something there. I can really build some herds down there. Imagine the kind of man I can be, how powerful I can be with the things that I can gain there in those cities. And next thing you know, he was sinning in that city. Next thing you know, death came to his house and to his family due to decisions that he made. So may we learn much from the life of Lot. The decisions that we make today start us on a path somewhere. Where is it leading us? And each decision that we make, may we recognize that often even some of the smallest decisions in life have spiritual repercussions. And so may we be, as the Bible tells us, to walk circumspectly, walk carefully through life. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the